Hi guys, this is Mr. Bennett, and this will be our second video for biology. In this video, this will be notes number 9, and we'll be covering biochemistry. This is really the first part of biochemistry, and if you want to look over this material in your textbook, it's pages 51 to 60. So, the first thing I want to talk about is the idea that there are compounds that are made in living organisms from the atom or element carbon. And we need to talk about how carbon bonds. So the unique thing about carbon is that it has the ability to create 4 bonds. Okay, it has 4 outer electrons, meaning those electrons at the very outer edges of the atom. There's 4 of them, and what that means is carbon can form 4 bonds. It can bond 4 times. And this is really unique because not a lot of elements are able to do this. So it makes carbon a very, very useful element for building large molecules. If you look at my pictures down here, you can see that each one of these carbons has created 4 bonds. So this carbon here, the line represents the bond. It has 1, 2, 3, 4 bonds. Then we have this carbon with 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice that carbon can bond with other carbons, like right here, or it can also bond with other atoms other than carbon, such as this hydrogen. This is what we call a straight chain. So here we have a carbon chain that's just simply linear or straight. Over here we have a branch. Notice this carbon in the middle is bonded to 1, 2, 3 carbons, as well as this hydrogen down here. So it still has 4 bonds, but it's bonded to 3 carbons, so we create a little branch going this way. You also have the ability to create a ring, in which case the carbons loop around and we get this nice ring-shaped structure. We'll see a lot of these as we go on throughout the year. Now, the reason why this is so useful is that carbon, with the ability to make 4 different bonds, will make really, really large molecules. And these molecules will be really useful for living organisms to use. So, let's talk about these large carbon molecules. Well, in order to have a large molecule, you have to start off with a smaller molecule. And these smaller molecules we call monomers. If we look at this word, we just split it up here. Mono means one or single. Okay, so one or single. And think of it as a single piece. Okay, if we take these single pieces and we combine them together, we create a polymer. Again, looking at the prefix here, poly means many. So think of this as many pieces. And when we have these molecules that are made up of many pieces, or many monomers, we call them macromolecules. Macro meaning large. So these are very, very large molecules. In my drawing down here, I have individual monomers. Okay, there's 3 of them. 1, 2, 3. These are carbon rings, just like we saw on the previous slide. So this is a carbon, 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 this is a carbon. We've just simplified it and made it into a geometric shape. If we take these 3 carbon rings, we can actually link them together into one giant molecule, okay, with 3 of those carbon rings chained together. So just to review this idea here, each of these is a single piece. So we would call these monomers. When we connect monomers, so we have multiple monomers combined, notice there's chemical bonds here holding them together in the middle, we call this a polymer. Okay, and there are different categories of polymers that we will study in biology. We call all of them together, just this whole class of polymers that are used for life, we call them macromolecules. And all it means is that they are very, very large. Okay. In fact, most of them will contain more than 3 monomers. They'll be very, very long, like a chain. So, alright. What I would like you to do right now is pause the video. You have a box on your notes, and I want you to draw this in your box. So hit the pause button, draw the monomers, label them as monomers, use your arrow here, and then draw your polymer and label that as well. You can add macromolecules below it so that you know that that's a macromolecule. Okay, you should have paused it. So let's talk about the 4 types of macromolecules. We have nucleic acids, proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. In this particular video, we're going to focus on the first 2, nucleic acids and proteins. Our second video later on will cover carbohydrates and lipids. So let's start off with nucleic acids. The first thing I want to talk about is the monomer that makes up nucleic acids. Again, a macromolecule is a very, very large molecule that is made up of monomers. And right now we are talking about one category of macromolecule known as a nucleic acid. Nucleic acids, their monomer is known as a nucleotide or nucleotides. Okay, so these are the individual pieces, nucleotides, that make up the polymer nucleic acids. So nucleotide is the monomer, this guy up here is the polymer. Okay, the long chain, the macromolecule. Now a nucleotide is made up of 3 basic parts. You have a phosphate group, you can see him right here. You have a sugar right here, kind of almost a house-shaped sugar. And then over here we have the nitrogen-containing base. So pretty much all these nucleotides will have the same phosphate group, the same sugar. However, this nitrogen-containing base is what will make the different nucleotides. Okay, there's actually 5 different nucleotides that we will run into over the course of this year. And that means that there are 5 different nitrogen-containing bases. Okay, each one is responsible for creating one of the 5 nucleotides that we talk about. So again, I want you to pause this video. You have a nice box there on your notes, and I want you to draw a picture of this within that box. Now to simplify it, what I would suggest doing is draw a house like so. Okay, you're going to label that as the sugar. Then coming up, you're going to put almost a little flag guy. Almost looks like a really weird flag, like so. This is your nitrogen base. And then coming up over here, you have your sun. Okay, so think of it as a house with a flag and a sun, or maybe it's a balloon, and this is your phosphate. Okay, but make sure you label these. Label them sugar, nitrogen containing base, phosphate group. Write it out, don't just use the symbols. So pause it now and do that if you haven't already. Alright, you should have paused it. Let's talk about, I just mentioned that the nitrogen containing base is what determines which nucleotide you're talking about. There are 4 of them, okay, and they are, well, the symbols that we use for them are A, C, G, and T. Okay, technically the 5th one, as I said there are 5, would be U. Okay, we'll talk about what U stands for in just a second. But A stands for adenine, it's right here. C stands for cytosine, which is right here. G stands for this guy here, guanine. And then T stands for thymine. Notice that these regions here are the same in all of our drawings here, right? They each have a phosphate group, they each have that sugar, but the base, the nitrogen containing base, this guy right here, is different. Notice it's red here, it's got a shape. Here we've got a yellow one, totally different shape. Here we've got a blue one. This was even different. If you compare them, notice there's an oxygen here, whereas this one has an NH2 group. So there are differences between the 4 bases, and that's what creates or makes them adenine, thymine, cytosine, or guanine. The 5th one, which I don't have a picture of, U, stands for uracil. Okay, we'll talk a lot about these towards the end of first semester, but for now, just understand there are technically 5 nucleotides, A, C, G, T, and U. Okay, and they are the monomers that build nucleic acids. Now let's talk about the macromolecule for nucleic acids. There are 2 different macromolecules, and they are DNA and RNA. So basically we use nucleotides to make DNA or RNA. So here's an example. We have a DNA double helix, and if you look in here, we have little nucleotides that are paired together on either side. Okay, and the strand is your macromolecule, the nucleic acids. The individual pieces are the monomers, the nucleotides. Now, our second category of macromolecules I want to talk about are known as proteins. Again, every time we talk about a macromolecule, we need to talk about the monomer. The monomer is the small piece, the single piece of that macromolecule. So if we're going to build proteins, the individual pieces or monomers that we'll use to build them are known as amino acids. Amino acids are made from 4 particular elements: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Those are the big 4. Okay, in fact, most organic things are made up of these big 4. All amino acids have the same basic structure, but there is one difference. They have a different functional R group. So if we look over here, notice that we have 2 different amino acids. This top one is glycine. Notice they both have a yellow NH2, nitrogen with 2 hydrogens. They both have the green carboxyl group, so it's a carbon with 2 oxygens and a hydrogen. Carbon, 2 oxygens and a hydrogen. So they both have that part. They both have this hydrogen attached to that middle carbon, but notice the big difference is this part right here. These guys are the R groups, what we call the functional R group. In other words, this is the part that makes it function differently. So glycine functions differently from this amino acid down here. And there are 20 different amino acids that we generally use to build proteins. Okay, so amino acids are the monomers of proteins. We just said that there are 20 different amino acids. Over here I have some blown up or enlarged amino acids. Remember, it's the R group that makes them function differently, that makes each of the 20 amino acids function a little bit differently. So if we look over here, this is a diagram that shows all 20 different standard amino acids. And if you notice, each one has this in common. They all have this structure. This part of the amino acid is always the same. Doesn't matter which category you're in, they all have that portion. But then you have this pink portion that is different in each particular amino acid. So they all have a different R section. That's what gives them their special properties. Now if we combine amino acids, we make the macromolecules that we know as proteins. But to combine amino acids, we need to bond them. And it turns out that proteins have a special type of bond. It's still a covalent bond, one of the bonds we've learned about. Okay, so this is still a covalent, that you're sharing electrons. But because it's part of a protein, because it's between 2 amino acids, we call it a peptide bond. If we have 2 amino acids that are joined together, that's referred to as a dipeptide, meaning you have di, or 2 amino acids joined by a peptide bond. If you get 3 or more amino acids chained together, we call that a poly or many peptide. Okay, polypeptides can grow. We can have protein chains that are like literally hundreds of amino acids long, and that's why we're able to get to this point where we consider it a macromolecule. Okay, a very, very large molecule, because it's many, many, many amino acids. Okay, so the last thing I want you to do in your notes is we have one more box left, right? Very bottom right hand corner. I want you to draw a generic amino acid. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to draw a carbon in the middle, hydrogen coming out the top. To the left, we're going to put our nitrogen group, which is a nitrogen with 2 H's. Okay. To the right, we're going to put our carboxyl group, which is a carbon double bonded to an oxygen and single bonded to an OH. And then coming right out the bottom, you're going to put an R and circle it, because this R group is what makes an amino acid different. But this is a generic amino acid, and this is what I want you to draw in your box. Okay, so pause it and do so. Alright, if you paused it and drawn it, then you are done with the video. Make sure that you fill out the online survey. Make sure you submit it and you see a little message that says you have submitted. And we will talk about macromolecules and biochemistry tomorrow.